So the perspective I'll be sharing discusses how we as individuals in this complex global society can intervene, and what are some of the thought frames we should employ before we make a decision about choosing to intervene in a global issue, and how we should go about doing it. So something that's really important that I think about is often we take for granted how interconnected our world is. They say this thing, it's a quote from one of my favorite movies called Mr. Nobody, about the butterfly effect, where when you basically boil an egg in Brazil, you can cause rain 2 months later in like a street in Manhattan, New York. Similarly, whenever we decide to do a small localized, intervention in a social issue like in your neighborhood, it can have international impact, and it can cause very global consequences. And similarly, when we choose to intervene in issues that are more global, for example, the refugees crisis in Europe that was extremely popular in 2015 to 17, or more recently about the Kashmir lockdown that's happening in India. So our decision to partake in such events basically means that we are, building a global narrative that can have impact not only in Kashmir but in other places around the world as well. So the first thing I want to share with you guys is, as individuals in your own capacity, the first thing you should implore before deciding to, intervene in any issue is thinking about the various levels of analysis of your intervention. Now, this is a frame of thought that maybe people that are, in their postgrad world are more familiar with, but this is something that we as common, laymen, take for granted. So when you decide to take part in an action, think about what are on a local level, how am I affecting the community in the city or the neighborhood? Then try to scale up a bit to maybe the provincial level. If I do this action here, are there any consequences on the policy, on the level of maybe just the state or the province? Scale it up to the national level. Am I hurting any narrative? So for example, should you choose to one day participate in a campaign that curtails a certain group cannot have access to resources, and you are actually supporting this stance. So when you say a group based on either their religion, their ethnicity, or their tribe cannot have access to, let's say, a certain water well or certain food from certain market, anything, the resource can be anything. Are you building a part of a national narrative that says that this group is not the same as the rest of us? If you are part of the people that are building this global, this national narrative, you could, at the end of the day, be responsible for this group being, we say, marginalized, which means this group, the status of this group is not the same as the rest of the humans in the country. Now, being youth and being part of this dialogue means making sure that we build a world in which every person has access to similar resources. So before you partake in such discussions and conversations, ask yourself, what is the impact I'm having? And then from the national level, what does this convey of internationally? So that is the first thing that's extremely important, is thinking about your actions through a levels of analysis point of view. Second, something that's really important and that I recently came across in the work of a really great writer. She's basically a philosophy professor that's specializing in social epistemology and decolonial theory, and her name is Linda Alcock. Something she writes about is, in a really powerful piece, is called The Problem of Speaking for Others. And she touches upon the fact that often the problem of intervening in a globalized world is difficult because of limitations on our personal mobility or because of access to resources. So for example, even if I want to, it may be quite difficult to directly help the Kashmiris under lockdown in Kashmir, India, which has been in place since August 5, 2019. And there have been quite a number of human rights violations that have occurred during the lockdown. So the route we take when we're intervening in a globalized world is often the root of speaking for the people who are oppressed and raising awareness or doing conscious raising. So letting other people know that this is something that is wrong, that is going on, in the hopes of like the people who are powerful enough or the people that do have the resources would be able to step in and help. So something that is really important that like Alkov points out is whenever you're helping a specific community, always look at your intention, because oftentimes when we are helping a community that is very far away from us geographically, like it's in another country or in another continent, something we forget is our intention. Why do we want to help these people? Does your own personal history or your political identity have anything to do with why you're helping these people? Now, Alkov points out, like, it's important to check the purity of your intentions and do this mental test of, like, if this group's identity would be changed, would I still be willing to help them? So if the people who were oppressed were from a different country, and the people who were oppressing them were from a different country, would I still be helping these people out? If your answer is yes, oftentimes your intentions are pure. If your answer is no, there might be some other social-political factor that is influencing you to behave the way that you're behaving. Now, something that Alkov highlights is like in the case of women activists from United States, they were quite willing to help support the Afghani women that had suffered at the hands of the Taliban all throughout like late 1990s till like most of like 2000 to 2012. But the same women were unwilling and unable to speak for the suffering of the women in Palestine that had endured like similar injustices at the hands of Israeli soldiers. So that basically shows you the perspective that maybe as women in the United States, it is more appealing to speak against the injustice in Afghanistan that are being done by local Afghanis because of one's identity as an American and because of the relationship of the United States with Afghanistan. It may be difficult to speak then against Israel because as a US citizen, your country is between neutral and supportive of the state of Israel. And so if you're speaking against Israeli soldiers, you might be going against what we say your national identity. So similarly, something that I like to ask myself very often is, as a Pakistani woman, what are some of the issues I'm willing to speak about? And what are some of the issues that I'm willing to overlook just because that country's stance, my country's stance might be to support that country on an international level. The important thing is, however, that when realizing that we as youth are what I like to say a borderless community, yes, we do have our own national identities, and yes, we have been born to a specific country and we are citizens to a specific country. But I think in today's globalized and interconnected world, we don't need to stay only focused on the impact of our own country or looking just inside our borders. It is important then to make sure that when you do decide to speak for another community anywhere on this earth, that you will have a positive impact on them, and you wouldn't care much about the the political factors that are in play, but mostly the social ones, and would answer your actions would help address the question of how do we make the lives of all people better everywhere. Now, something that's important then is, and Alkov raises a good point again, is if there is a problem in intervening for others, what is the best way that we go about it? And Alkov proposes, and I agree, is the best way to intervene with, like, in any global problem is to understand it at a local level. So, for example, for a development project of ensuring that water is available in a small village, it means you need to fully understand the problem from a local's perspective. know that how the people on ground with this problem are affected. And so the best way to understand a problem fully is to have a local's perspective. And to have a local's perspective, you should speak to the people involved in that problem rather than speaking for them. So if you can, try to have conversations with people that you know whose human rights are being heard. You don't really need to go to an international platform to do this. You can start with your own community. But the wonderful thing is that you're today on this great platform with people from all over the world, youth from all over the world. And today, and like for the next couple of days, you actually have the opportunity to speak to each other about some of the sufferings that people might have endured in their countries that you may have heard of because of the internet or because of news media. And the hope is at the end of the day, we are able to realize that we as youth are powerful, we have hope, we have resources. It's because we have that intention of making sure that everyone everywhere has access to similar resources, and that nobody, because of where they're from, should be treated any differently or because of any facet of their identity.
Yes, Isa, sorry, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you, Wafa. That's all good. So I think that is the most important point that I wanted to share for today's conference. Now, just to recap, when you are intervening in a global in today's world, which is quite complex, make sure that you check your actions from a levels of analysis point of view. So if you decide to intervene, what are the impact you will have on a local level, national level, regional level, and international level? That's first. Second, check the purity of your intervention or your intentions. So, are you willing to intervene in a problem because of any underlying political factors or because of how your identity is in this world? If you're willing to help this group, no matter where they're from, chances are that your intentions are quite pure. Third, if you're intervening in a problem, try to make sure you understand the local perspective of the problem rather than just seeing a very little global perspective of the problem. And to understand the local perspective, it is important to speak to the locals in the area. And fourth, to basically intervene in this globalized, complex world, remember to make sure that you speak to the people that are most affected if you can. And I would like to reiterate that this platform for the youth today that we're in right now is extremely an important way of helping connect you with other people that might be affected by some of the problems you've heard so much about. But today, and for the next few days, you actually get a chance to talk to these people. So take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you so much, Wafa. Thank you so much, Omer, and the rest of the team for having me here. It's truly a pleasure to speak to all of you.